All right, let's dive in, shall we? Today we're tackling a topic that's often shrouded in misunderstanding, addiction. And we're doing it through a fascinating lens, neuroscience. We're dissecting Mark Lewis's book, The Biology of Desire. It's a real eye-opener because he challenges that whole addiction as a disease model that we
Yeah.
hear so much about.
Yeah, the whole disease model is so pervasive, but Lewis really flips the script. He digs into the brain science. And what's really interesting is he weaves in these really powerful personal stories to bring those concepts to life.
I'm intrigued already. So, instead of this idea of a broken brain, what's Lewis's take?
He frames addiction as a process of learning, actually deep learning, driven by desire. And it's not just about substances. He looks at all sorts of addictions, heroin, meth, alcohol, even food. It's all about how those neural pathways in our brains get shaped and reinforced through experience.
Okay, so walk me through this. How does the brain actually learn addiction? We're talking about those neural pathways, right? What's going on there?
It all comes down to neuroplasticity, the brain's amazing ability to change and adapt based on our experiences. Every time we engage in a behavior, especially one that triggers a strong emotional response, those connections in the brain get strengthened. It's like carving a path through the woods. The more you walk it, the more defined it becomes.
That makes sense. So let's look at one of the stories Lewis uses. He introduces us to Natalie, whose journey starts with anxiety, trying to find a way to quiet that constant unease. And then she discovers opiates.
Right, and opiates, for Natalie, they provide that temporary relief, that escape from the anxiety. And here's where that deep learning kicks in. Every time she uses, her brain is strengthening the connection between opiates and relief, making it more and more likely that she'll repeat that behavior.
It's like her brain is getting wired for addiction. But it's not just a psychological aspect, right? There's the physical dependence, too.
Oh, absolutely. As Natalie continues to use, she needs higher and higher doses to achieve that same feeling. And when she tries to stop, her body screams for it. Withdrawal symptoms are brutal, and they just reinforce that urge to use again.
It's a vicious cycle. And Lewis talks about how it's not just the substance itself. The whole ritual, like with Natalie, the needles, the preparation, it all becomes part of the addiction, too.
It's incredible how the brain works, isn't it? It doesn't distinguish between the substance and the cues associated with it. They become intertwined, so even seeing a needle can trigger those cravings.
It's like her environment becomes this minefield of triggers,
Yeah.
constantly setting off those addictive pathways. And that's where this part of the brain, the striatum, comes into play, right?
Exactly. The striatum is this key player in motivation and reward. It's where dopamine, that feel-good neurotransmitter, hangs out. So when Natalie uses, her striatum is flooded with dopamine, reinforcing that connection between the drug and the feeling. And over time, those pathways become so dominant, it's like they hijack her decision-making.
Wow, so it's not just about willpower. It's like her brain has been rewired to prioritize the drug above everything else.
And this isn't so different from what happens when we fall in love or achieve a goal. Our brains are designed to repeat behaviors that feel good, and those repetitions change the brain's wiring.
That's both fascinating and a little bit scary. It makes you realize how powerful those neural pathways can be.
Uh,
But Natalie's story doesn't end there, right? She eventually finds a way out of that cycle.
she does. And it's a testament to the brain's incredible capacity for change, this neuroplasticity we were talking about. Even though addiction can create these deep grooves in the brain, they're not set in stone. With time, effort, and the right support, new, healthier pathways can emerge.
Okay, so what was the turning point for Natalie? How did she start to break free from those addictive patterns?
Ironically, ending up in prison actually became a catalyst for change for her. It's a harsh environment, but it removes her from her usual triggers and forces a period of abstinence.
So that forced abstinence, what did it do to her brain? Did it start to unlearn the addiction?
In a way, yes. Without that constant reinforcement of the drug, those dopamine-fueled pathways in the striatum, they start to weaken. Think of it like a muscle that's no longer being used. It starts to atrophy.
Okay, so that's the physical side of it, the brain starting to reset.
Hmm.
But what about the psychological and emotional aspects of recovery? What was happening there for Natalie?
That's where the real work of recovery comes in.
Mm.
It's not just about stopping the drug use. It's about building new pathways, new habits, a whole new way of being in the world. For Natalie, she started to connect with other people in recovery. She found support, and she began to build a new identity for herself, one that wasn't defined by heroin.
So it's like she was literally rewiring her brain, creating a new neural landscape. And that's where that whole idea of neuroplasticity really shines through. It's not just about undoing the damage of addiction. It's about creating something new, something stronger.
It really highlights the idea that recovery isn't about becoming a different person. It's about rediscovering who you are beneath the layers of addiction, tapping into those deeper desires, those core values that got buried under the weight of the addiction.
That's a really powerful message. So we've got Natalie's story, which is incredibly moving and inspiring. But Lewis has a whole cast of characters in this book, each illustrating different aspects of addiction and recovery. I'm really curious to hear about Brian's experience with meth. That's a whole other beast, right?
Oh, absolutely. Brian's story is a wild ride. And it really underscores the intensity of addiction, particularly with a substance like methamphetamine. It shows how even the most driven, ambitious people can get caught in its grip. So Brian, he's this high achiever, running his own business, incredibly successful, but he's constantly battling fatigue.
I can relate to that. The entrepreneurial grind never stops.
Right, and then he discovers meth. And it's like this instant boost, energy, focus, like he can suddenly conquer the world.
Sounds like he found that magic bullet, at least at first. But we all know those magic bullets often backfire.
Exactly. Initially, he justifies it, He tells himself, I need this to function, to keep up with these insane demands. But as the use escalates, the lines get blurry. He's chasing that initial high, but it's costing him more and more.
I imagine it quickly spirals out of control. It's like that tunnel vision, right? His whole world shrinks down to just getting and using meth and dealing with the consequences.
And another part of the brain comes into play here, the dorsal striatum. It's basically the habit center, It takes those rewarding actions and turns them into automatic behaviors. So you've got that initial dopamine rush in the ventral striatum that gets you hooked, but then the dorsal striatum lays down those deep tracks of addiction, making it almost impossible to resist.
So it's like one part of the brain gets you hooked on the feeling, and another part turns it into this compulsive routine. It's like a 1-2 punch. But isn't there supposed to be a part of the brain that's in control, like the brakes?
The prefrontal cortex, right. Right, the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as the CEO of the brain, responsible for all those executive functions like planning, decision-making, self-control. But here's the thing. As addiction takes hold, the prefrontal cortex basically gets sidelined.
So the CEO is out of commission, and the addiction is running the show. No wonder it feels so impossible to break free. But Brian does eventually turn things around, right?
He does. And his story really highlights that recovery isn't just about stopping the drug use. It's about addressing those underlying issues that fueled the addiction in the first place. For Brian, that meant confronting some past traumas, rebuilding his self-esteem, and finding a new sense of purpose that wasn't tied to external achievements.
So it's like he had to rebuild his inner world, create a new foundation for his life, and then his brain can start to follow suit.
That's incredible. And as he healed those deeper wounds, his prefrontal cortex started to regain its power. Those brakes started working again, and new, healthier pathways could begin to flourish. It's a powerful reminder that recovery is possible, but it often takes more than just willpower. It's about rewiring the brain from the inside out.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got Natalie's story about anxiety and opiates, Brian's drive and meth addiction, both showing how deeply ingrained these patterns can become. But Lewis doesn't stop there. He introduces us to Donna, whose story dives into the world of prescription drug addiction. It's a problem that we hear so much about these days, and her story sheds light on how easily it can happen.
Donna's story is a classic example of how addiction can kind of sneak up on you. It often starts with legitimate medical use and gradually escalates into dependence. Donna is a nurse, successful, juggling a demanding career, family responsibilities, but beneath the surface, she's grappling with this growing reliance on painkillers.
It's that classic image of the high-functioning addict, right? Everything looks perfect from the outside, but internally, there's this whole other struggle going on. What was fueling Donna's addiction? What was driving her to those pills?
For Donna, it was all about coping with stress. Her husband was battling chronic pain, she's working long hours, there's this constant pressure to keep it all together, to be the strong one. Those painkillers offered her a temporary escape, a way to numb the emotional pain and just create a sense of control in a world that felt incredibly chaotic.
It's like she was self-medicating with those pills, trying to find a way to manage the overwhelm. But as with Natalie and Brian, those initial positive effects started to wear off. She built up a tolerance, and her brain became increasingly reliant on the drugs to function.
And the tricky thing about prescription drug addiction is how easily it can blend into everyday life, Donna was able to function, to maintain her responsibilities, at a huge cost. Her life revolved around obtaining and using those pills, and she went to great lengths to hide her addiction from everyone.
It's a reminder. that addiction can take many forms and often thrives in secrecy and denial. But for Donna, that facade eventually crumbles, right?
It did. She was caught stealing medication, and it was from her own family. It shattered that image she'd so carefully constructed, a truly devastating moment. But it forced her to confront the reality of her addiction and seek help.
Her story is heartbreaking, but it also highlights the importance of support systems in recovery. Was she able to find the help she needed? Did she have people she could turn to?
She did, and this is where the power of connection and compassion comes in. Donna found healing through therapy, support groups, and the unwavering love of her family. They didn't judge her, they didn't abandon her. They stood by her as she went through that difficult journey of recovery.
It's a beautiful reminder that even in those darkest moments of addiction, there's always hope, and that connection and support can be so powerful. Okay, so we've got Natalie, Brian, and Donna each illustrating these different aspects of addiction. But Lewis brings in two more stories, right? Johnny and Alice, each adding another layer to this complex picture. What can you tell us about Johnny's journey?
Johnny's story takes us into the world of alcoholism, and it's a stark reminder of how addiction can warp even the most well-intentioned people. His journey unfolds over decades, starting with social drinking and gradually escalating into this debilitating dependence.
It's that slow burn, right? You don't realize the fire's growing until it's too late.
Yeah.
What was behind his descent into alcoholism? What was driving him to drink?
For Johnny, it was all about numbing the pain of loneliness. He was a successful businessman, charming, sociable. But beneath that polished exterior, he carried this deep sense of isolation. Alcohol offered him a temporary reprieve, a way to silence those inner demons and feel a sense of connection, even if it was fleeting.
So he was using alcohol to fill a void, to create that sense of belonging that he was missing. But as with any addiction, that crutch eventually became a cage, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And what's striking about Johnny's story is that he managed to function for years despite his increasing alcohol consumption. He maintained his business, his relationships, but at a tremendous cost. He was living a double life, constantly juggling the demands of his addiction with the expectations of the outside world.
It's another example of how addiction can operate in plain sight, hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. But eventually, that truth had to come out.
It did. As his drinking spiraled out of control, he lost his business, his marriage, almost lost his life. It was a devastating crash, but in a way, it was also a catalyst for change. In the depths of his despair, Johnny finally surrendered to the reality of his addiction and began that arduous journey of recovery.
So even though his story is filled with so much loss and heartbreak, there's still that glimmer of hope. He found a way to turn things around.
He did. And his recovery journey highlights the crucial roles of personal responsibility and self-awareness in overcoming addiction. It wasn't about blaming himself or getting lost in guilt. It was about understanding the factors that contributed to his addiction and making a conscious choice to chart a different course. He embraced therapy, engaged in self-reflection, and rebuilt his life, this time on a foundation of sobriety.
It's a powerful reminder that even after years of addiction, it's never too late to reclaim your life. Okay, so we've explored the stories of Natalie, Brian, Donna, and Johnny, each one grappling with different substances and different underlying struggles. But Lewis doesn't stop there, right? He brings in Alice, whose story takes us beyond substance abuse and into the world of behavioral addiction. What's her story about?
Alice's story sheds light on how powerful our brains are, how they can get hooked on patterns of behavior even when there are no drugs or alcohol involved. She struggled with an eating disorder, specifically bulimia. It was driven by this desperate need for control and a very distorted relationship with her body.
It's a reminder that addiction isn't limited to just substances, right? It's about how our brains get caught in those feedback loops of craving, compulsion, and temporary relief, regardless of what we're fixated on. How did Alice's struggles play out?
Alice was trapped in the cycle of binging and purging, seeking comfort and solace in those rituals, but in a very unhealthy way. She battled body image issues, felt overwhelmed by societal pressures, and this really harsh inner critic. The eating disorder became her way of coping, of trying to exert control in a world that felt chaotic and unpredictable.
It's like she was trying to manage her internal world by manipulating her external experience. But as with any addiction, those coping mechanisms eventually become a prison.
Exactly, and her story reveals these striking parallels with the struggles of Natalie, Brian, Donna, and Johnny. We see the same neural pathways being activated, the same cycles of craving and compulsion, the same difficulty in breaking free from those ingrained patterns. It underscores that addiction, at its core, is about how our brains learn and adapt, regardless of the target of those desires.
This is mind-blowing stuff. We've explored 5 different stories, each highlighting a different piece of this complex puzzle we call addiction. What are some of the key takeaways that Lewis draws from these experiences? What are the big picture insights here?
One of the most compelling arguments Lewis makes is that addiction is fundamentally about learning, particularly this concept of deep learning. Think of it as the brain carving out neural pathways through repeated exposure and reinforcement. The more we engage in a particular behavior, especially if it triggers those intense emotions, the deeper those pathways become, the more ingrained they become in our brains.
It's like creating a well-worn path through a forest,
Mm.
right? The more you walk it, the easier it becomes to follow, and the harder it is to deviate from that path. But there's more to it than just repetition. Our emotions play a role too, don't they? How do they influence how deeply those pathways get carved into our brains?
Absolutely. And that's where now appeal comes in. Lewis says addiction is fueled by the brain's tendency to go for that instant gratification over long-term consequences. It's like our brains are constantly seeking that quick hit of dopamine, that surge of pleasure or relief, even if it means trouble down the line.
So it's like our ancient wiring for survival is hijacked, and we become fixated on those short-term rewards, even if they ultimately lead to more suffering. But isn't there something more to it than just the biology? Our individual experiences, our psychological makeup, our social context, all of that plays a role, right?
Absolutely. Lewis doesn't just focus on the neurobiology of addiction, he emphasizes the psychological and social factors too. He argues that addiction often stems from a combination of things, like early adversity, social isolation, and a lack of meaningful connections.
That makes so much sense. If you've experienced trauma, neglect, or just a chronic sense of disconnection, you're more likely to seek solace in substances or behaviors that offer that temporary escape from those painful feelings.
Exactly. And if you're lacking a strong support system, a sense of belonging, or a purpose that gives your life meaning, it can be even harder to break free from those addictive patterns. It's like trying to climb out of a pit without any ropes or ladders. You need something to hold on to, something to help pull you up and out.
This really shifts the whole perspective on addiction, doesn't it? It's not just about willpower or making better choices. It's about understanding those deeper wounds, those unmet needs that are driving these behaviors. So, if addiction isn't a disease and it's not simply about willpower, what does recovery look like through this lens? What's the path forward? It's been a really enlightening conversation so far. I think we've established that addiction is way more complex than just a disease. But if we're moving away from that model, what's the alternative? How do we actually help people who are struggling if we're not treating a disease?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And to Lewis's credit, he doesn't shy away from it. He argues that what we need is a complete shift in our mindset, a more empowering approach that really focuses on personal agency and self-awareness, not just treating symptoms.
So instead of viewing people as passive patients, we need to empower them to be active participants in their own recovery, almost like giving them the tools to reclaim their brains.
Exactly. And this is where that concept of neuroplasticity comes in again. If addiction can sort of hijack the brain's learning mechanisms, then recovery can harness those same mechanisms to make positive change. It's about creating new pathways, new habits, a whole new way of relating to those cravings and triggers.
You know, we hear a lot about things like the 12-step program, but Lewis seems to be a bit critical of those traditional approaches. Why is that?
He's not saying those approaches don't work for some people, but he argues that they can often reinforce a sense of powerlessness. It's like saying, you're broken, you need to surrender. Lewis is advocating for a more individualized, a more empowering approach that really recognizes each person's unique journey.
So what would that look like in practice? If we're not just focusing on abstinence, what are the key elements of this new model of recovery?
Well, for starters, treatment needs to be truly tailored to the individual. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to addiction. We need to consider the whole picture. Each person's unique circumstances, their goals, their motivations, everything.
It's like instead of just treating the addiction, you're treating the person, right? What else is important in this approach? What else do we need to focus on?
Another crucial piece is fostering self-awareness and insight. It's not enough to just stop the behavior. You really need to dig deeper and understand the why behind it. What are the underlying needs, the emotional wounds, the thought patterns that are driving those actions?
So instead of just saying, don't do that, you're helping someone explore why they're doing it in the first place. That's a huge shift in perspective. And once they have that understanding, then what? Where do you go from there?
Then you can start to work on developing healthier coping mechanisms. Instead of reaching for the drug, the alcohol, the food, whatever it is, What are some other ways to manage stress, soothe anxiety, and navigate those difficult emotions? It's about building a whole new set of tools and strategies.
So that's where the rewiring comes in. You're literally training the brain to respond differently to those triggers. But it sounds like there's an even bigger piece to this, something beyond just managing behaviors.
Absolutely. Lewis talks a lot about the importance of fostering a sense of purpose and meaning in recovery. It's about connecting to something larger than yourself, something that gives your life direction and motivation.
So finding that thing that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning, that thing that really makes you feel alive and engaged with the world.
Exactly. And that can take so many different forms. It might be reconnecting with passions you'd lost touch with, exploring new interests, finding ways to contribute to your community, anything that gives you a sense of fulfillment and makes you feel like you're living a life that truly matters.
I'm starting to see how this whole approach is so fundamentally different from the traditional disease model.
Yeah.
It's not about fighting a disease, it's about nurturing growth and transformation. It's a really hopeful perspective.
It really is. It's acknowledging the brain's incredible capacity for change, its ability to heal and adapt. It's not about eliminating desire, it's about redirecting it, channeling it toward things that are healthier and more fulfilling.
So for our listeners out there who might be grappling with these issues, what's the one thing you want them to take away from all of this?
I think the most important message is that addiction is not a life sentence. It doesn't have to define you. It's a challenge, a struggle for sure. But it's not the end of your story. Your brain is not broken. It's capable of amazing things. You have the power within you to change, to heal, to write a new chapter in your life.
That's a powerful message, a message of hope. And for those who are supporting someone struggling with addiction, what would you say to them? What advice would you give?
I'd say offer compassion, not judgment. Listen without trying to fix them. Believe in their ability to recover, even when they might doubt themselves. And most importantly, remember that you're not alone in this. There are resources, there's support, there's hope.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
I think Lewis's book offers a truly groundbreaking perspective on addiction. And I'm already finding myself thinking about how these concepts apply to all sorts of habits and patterns in my own life.
That's what's so exciting about it, isn't it? It's not just about addiction. It's about understanding how our brains work, how we learn, how we grow, how we change. And that knowledge can empower us to create lives that are more aligned with our values and our deepest desires, lives that are full of meaning and purpose.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself. If you're intrigued by any of these ideas, definitely check out The Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis. It's a real game changer. And until next time, keep those brains engaged and keep those minds open to new possibilities.